And keep in mind, the type of life in America that they got from the newspapers were police dogs chasing black people in Birmingham, water hoses, poor people sleeping under newspapers, on city streets. All the bad aspects of our country were what the Russians got through their newspapers. However, many people had reasonable doubts about the veracity or the spin put on these type of messages. Another aspect that I think was a favorable one for us is that so frequently Russians would say, why are we opposed to each other now? We fought the fascists during the war. We were allies against this great evil. And I don't understand what's going on now. Could you explain? To the credit of frankly, the United States Information Agency, when we were trained in Washington and in other places in the country, no one ever told us what specifically to answer. The basic instruction was answer according to your conscience. So that was quite commendable. And to be sure, we did. It wasn't all peaches and cream. The government, or I should say the Communist Party, would periodically send what they refer to as agitators, agitatori, who would stand in the audience and try to disrupt us by asking irrelevant questions or insulting questions or maybe something personal. And obviously it was extremely important not to lose one's self-control either by being upset or by showing anger. I can remember one kind of comical, but I think revealing instance in which I was giving a presentation on a piece of architecture, and in the crowd of about maybe 40 people standing in a semicircle around me, one particular individual I began to realize was asking a series of questions, one after the other, interspersed with what I was talking about, which had nothing to do with architecture. For example, I mean, this is not for example, this is what I recall. Do you smoke? And I answered him in passing, no I don't, and continued with my spiel. And then the next question was, well, do you drink? And I quickly answered, at meals I do, I don't drink a lot. The third question was, do you like women? And at the point I began to realize that maybe he is trying to get me, maybe he's gunning for me. So I said, okay, I think the best answer to this is the picture, which, has the power of 1,000 words. So I pulled out a photograph of my little daughter, who in a fishing boat, holding a little fish in her hand, and I said, well, I'm happily married, and this is my daughter. And I showed the photograph to as many people in the audience who could get close to it. At that point, two huge Russian soldiers quietly walked up behind the gentleman, lifted him by his elbows, turned him around while his feet were dangling over the floor, and just carried him out and put him at the outside of the circle. When my little spiel was finished, one of the soldiers came up to me and said, we're not all like that. And I said, there are fools everywhere and there are nasty people everywhere, so I understand fully. It was almost as if there was the United States was this miraculous place somewhere over the horizon, and there was a great deal of curiosity about us, so that the architecture was the subject I really tried to stay on because that was the reason for the exhibit being there, but it was inevitable to handle other questions. And one of the biggest questions, the hottest item, was the Vietnamese War. And as I said, most people were perplexed and wondered what in the world was going on there. Yeah. The life that we had there was almost like a dream existence, because before going over for the 8 months, all of our financial arrangements had been made in Washington, so that whatever salaries, whatever income we made, was sent either to our account or to some individual, and also that all the finances were taken care of. And all we had to do when we were there is have the money which was given to us in what they call a per diem. We got money there to deal with, to pay for a room and board and other expenses. So we lived very much unlike the way we live at home in the States, where you have houses and lawnmowers and cars and bills and insurances and day-to-day little problems. Basically, we did our job, and after our job, we were free to have fun, to see Russians who had the interest and perhaps the courage to reach out and make friends with us. And I made a couple of good friends. And this did not happen that frequently because there were a lot of people who were afraid that they would be stigmatized later on because they had reached out to an American. Cultural events were readily available to us. It was just a wonderful time. Yeah, one in particular, the very early in my stay in Leningrad, he came forward, befriended us, and he was really wonderful. He was also strangely fearless. He just didn't care about the authorities. He was a jazz lover, and jazz basically consumed his life. And we spent a lot of time doing various things, and he invited friends and myself over to his apartment. And we met a lot of really incredibly exciting, talented Russian people in the former Leningrad. We've corresponded now all through these years. Good grief, what? Almost 50 years. It's an amazing correspondence. And at one point in the early 70s, we lost contact. He had stopped writing. It so happened that in 1976, I traveled over to Finland, and from Finland I went over to visit Leningrad and decided I'd try to see if I can find him. So I called up, and lo and behold, he answered, and I told him I thought he had died or something. Well, what had happened was that he spent 6 years in the Gulag, that he was arrested by the KGB at the time. It's now has another appellation, and spent 6 years working, doing slave labor and eating potatoes and cabbage. But he looked pretty good when he got out, a little thinner, but thank heavens he survived. As he told me, and he showed me the transcript of the trial, the Russian trials are set up that in such a way that the judge is a government attorney, prosecuting attorney, along with the prosecuting attorney. So it's essentially 2 against 1. He was with a group of young friends who were actually planning to bomb the upper echelon of the Soviet government during some parade in Red Square. The reason he did not get more than a 6-year sentence was that because of the reporting of one of the members who happened to be a KGB spy, he was arguing for them, telling his friends that this was madness, and even though he was with the group, he tried to dissuade them from carrying out their plot, so that he got the light sentence of 6 years. Sounds strange. It sounds like something from a story from outer space, but this is what he told me, and I read the manuscript. The first thing that you become aware is the overwhelming impact of one source of power everywhere, and a monolithic way of thinking. Everything is same think, unithink, monothink, or whatever you want to call it. But I remember talking with one journalist who said, well, the difference between us and you is that we're being brainwashed here in Russia, and so are you, only you don't know it. So, food for thought anyway. I don't know whether I agreed or disagreed with him, but anyway, it's something to just think about. Culturally speaking, my thought was that intuitively, I got along really pretty well with people. We seemed to have so much more in common. One of the things that struck me was the incredible generosity. If you went to somebody's house and you made the mistake of complimenting that person on this or that item, it became yours. So you had to be careful about what you were giving. And I think one of the major distinctions between our two countries was the idea of friendship. A friend there is someone with whom you trust your life. It is unconditional. And it's extremely important to have that type of a friend in a society where there are people who will report on you, who will tell other people what you said or could hurt you. I think in America, I have a few really good friends, and I think about that as being analogous. That these are friends, and maybe I learned this from being in Russia. A friend is a person you can trust anything you have with, and be able to sleep at night. So I think I learned that. It's the best thing I think I learned from my stay in Russia. I think, and I think I've already said this, the recollection that the United States and Soviet Russia fought together against the Germans, or as they always put it, the fascists. And we have to understand that in 1965, no one really saw everyday evidence of the Second World War. Whereas at that time, I could still see that, especially out in the countryside, I could see the remnants of military installations. But more than anything, day to day, hour to hour, I saw invalids, people with missing limbs. And actually, I was astounded. In 1965, on all the public transit, there were seats right near the entrance for invalids. I think we got around to treating our invalided people and handicapped people with a little more consideration very well, somewhere around the 80s. So, but the Russians almost by necessity, because they were so damaged physically. I mean, the United States, I believe we lost somewhere around 450,000 casualties, deaths due to the Second World War. The Russians lost between 20 million and 30 million, which is colossal, just colossal. Everybody lost someone. So it naturally changes you. It makes you different than someone who didn't. Yeah, I would think that it would, and I know from personal experience because I went back to the Soviet Union right in the last year of its existence, from 89 spanning into 1990, and I was girding myself for all those wonderful debates and arguments that I did have with people about various politics, and I can remember enjoying it immensely, especially after I learned something from one particular person. And we were talking about Vietnam, and we got to a particular point where I said, but you know, what's the point in arguing? And he looked at me and he said, you know, out of argument comes truth. And I thought about that, and I realized that he had the handle on what argument is ideally supposed to be like, not vilifying the person with whom you disagree, but somehow working together, even from two different viewpoints, towards something you could call a mutual understanding, or if you want to call it truth. So yeah, that was something I really learned. Anyway, getting back to your question about things changing, I had this idea when I went back with the USIA to another exhibit. This one was on industrial design. That it was going to be really fun having these discussions and debates again. Well, the difference was that when I said something about America, everybody simply nodded their head in a sense. I said, where's the argument? No more argument. Then I began to argue for perhaps the opposite, because Russians were already sensing change in their government. And I tried to suggest that it's possible, just quite possible, that the political and economic model of the United States may not be the ideal one for them. That may be something like the Scandinavian model, which had some built-in social security aspects to it, medical care, retirements, all that, along with free enterprise, might be the better model for them. So here I was arguing a slightly different viewpoint. It was a totally different. People were asking what they should do. Should they immigrate? I'm 45 years old. I have 2 children. Do you think I should immigrate? What will happen when I immigrate? So it was a totally different experience. The other was the absolute, what seemed to me to be structural breakdown of Russia. Everything. I mean, in 1965, when I flew inside of the Soviet Union with a Soviet airline called Aeroflot, it was a gleaming, dazzling, phenomenal airline. It was just like top of the art, state-of-the-art, top of the line. 1990, I had great concerns about flying Aeroflot, even when it meant that I would be from some area in Siberia flying as a courier to Moscow to our embassy, bringing reports. I always offered it to the younger folks, figuring that, you know, if I fly enough on Aeroflot, my number will come up. So that is emblematic of a general breakdown. Things like going into a restaurant and getting a menu and then finding that there was nothing on the menu that they had to offer, and finding out, well, my goodness, what happened to the pepper? Oh, we haven't had pepper for months. Silly little items like that, which just suggested a general structural breakdown in the country. Yeah, that's an intriguing question. Yeah, the first time I was there, honestly, I felt as close to being a missionary as I could possibly imagine myself, to bring a message. And my reasoning went this way. In the city of Leningrad, 600,000 people have been counted and went past me, many of them stopping and talking. And I thought that, how many of these people will actually confront face to face another American in their lives? And I said, this is extremely important, that I've got to be on for these people. I've got to present them with the best picture of myself as a human being and as a representative of my country as I can possibly do. It's my job. That's what I'm there for. I can't be there being a pout. I can't be there shouting, "Oh, we're better than you are." I can just present myself as an ordinary American person who's willing to talk with an ordinary Russian person, and it was a truly rewarding experience. And it's something you really can't. It's hard to explain to people when you come back home and you get your usual problems. The car didn't start this morning. Oh, I got a new lawnmower. Yeah, but I was a missionary in Russia, bringing what Americans are like to Russians. So it's a very highly personal thing that really stays with me, and I can only hope that I did the absolute best I could. Now just one little. I wish I had the photograph here, the picture. The last day that I worked in the Soviet Union at the exhibit, giving my presentation, was in the city of Novosibirsk. And this gentleman came up, and he had a picture. It was drawn by his wife, and she had come to, for some reason, listen to me talk several times. And he said she could not come today, but she wanted me to have a drawing that she made. And the drawing, if I can depict it, was of the inside of a well, with sunshine streaming from above at an angle, and a hand in the water of the well, sticking part of the way out of the water like this, receiving the rays of the sun. And the well was the Soviet Union, and the sun was the United States. And the little caption was, "Thank you for bringing some color into our gray lives." So I think that pretty much tells the story.